The problem is the cops that are all over these militias are actually just, ideological sympathizers. ProPublica reported by Joshua Kaplan reported about a guy who went and intercepted the militia movement. Okay, John Williams. He went in and joined the ranks of the Oath Keepers. And it's really interesting because he didn't do this in unison with the federal agents. He didn't do this in collaboration with police officers. He didn't even do this. He did this seemingly on his own. He was like, I want to investigate what is going on here. And then after the fact, he turned around and gave all of this information to ProPublica reporters. For years, he carefully monitored the activity and found out something that we kind of knew already, which we had talked about before, especially with respect to the Proud Boys in Portland, for example, that these guys are directly in contact and sometimes directly working with members of law enforcement. Shocking. I'll give you some of the highlights. A freelance vigilante, a wilderness survival trainer, spent years undercover climbing the ranks of right-wing militias. He didn't tell the police or the FBI. He didn't tell his family or friends. He penetrated a new generation of militia leaders, which included doctors and government attorneys. Experts say that militias could have a renaissance under Donald Trump. He sent ProPublica a massive trove of documents and conversations he secretly recorded, give a unique, startling window into the militia movement. On April 1st, 2023, Williams retrieved the bag from his closet and rushed to his car. He had no time to clean the dishes that he accumulated in his apartment. He did not know if armed men were out looking for him. He did not know if he would ever feel safe to return. He parked his car for the night in the foothills overlooking Salt Lake City and curled up his 6'4" frame in the back seat of a 20-year-old Honda. This was his new home. He turned on a recording app to add an entry to his diary. His voice started a high-pitched rasp of a lifelong smoker. Where to start, he sighed, taking a deep breath. After more than 2 years undercover, he'd been growing rash and impulsive. He had feared someone was in danger and tried to warn him, but it backfired. Williams was sure that at least one person knew he was a double agent now, he said into his phone. It's only a matter of time before it gets back to the rest. In the daylight, Williams dropped an envelope with no return address in a U.S. Postal Service mailbox. He'd loaded it with a flash drive and a gold Oath Keepers medallion. It was addressed to me. The documents laid out a remarkable odyssey. Posing as an ideological compatriot, Williams had penetrated the top ranks of two of the most prominent right-wing militias in the country. He'd slept in the home with a man who claims to be the new head of the Oath Keepers, rifling through his files in the middle of the night. He'd advised elaborate ruses to gather evidence of malicious ties to high-ranking law enforcement officials. He'd uncovered secret operations like the surveillance of a young journalist, then improvised ways to sabotage the militants' schemes. In one group, his ploys were so successful that he became the militia's top commander in the state of Utah. Now, he was a fugitive. He drove south towards a desert 4 hours from the city where he could disappear. That's right. Now, what's really interesting about this story is, once again, this was not a federal law enforcement operation. It wasn't an infiltration by a Fed. It was just a dude who just went undercover because he personally was like, what's going on with these militias? What's happening here? He saw January 6, 2021. He saw the militia movements and and how prominently they were a part of January 6, 2021. And he was like, I'm going to go and join these militias. I'm going to go and detail what they're doing. Hey, come on now, be fair. There are tons of cops that are currently infiltrating these militias. Yeah, the problem is the cops that are all over these militias are actually just, ideological sympathizers. I'm sure that there are some federal law enforcement officers involved in these militia movements, not because of their ideological allegiance to the militia movements, but, overall, yeah, I know you're joking, chatter. I know. I'm not missing the joke, chat. Calm down. Many of those that carry the badge are also fellow travelers. So, the Capitol riot had been nagging at me too. I'd reported extensively on January 6th. I sat with families who blamed the militias for snatching their loved ones away from them, pulling them into a life of secret meetings and violent plots, or into a jail cell. By the time Williams contacted me through most of the, though, the most infamous groups appeared to have largely gone dark. Were militias more enduring, more potent than it seemed? Some of what he told me seemed significant. Still, before the package arrived, it could feel like I was corresponding with a shadow. I knew Williams treated deception as an art form. When you spin a lie, he once told me, you have to have things they can verify so they won't think to ask questions. While stories generally seem precise and sober, always reassuring for a journalist, I needed to proceed with extreme skepticism. The files that were sent over to ProPublica give a unique window at the once expansive and intimate into one of the most consequential and volatile social movements of our time. Williams penetrated a new generation of paramilitary leaders, which included doctors, career cops, and government attorneys. Sometimes they were frightening, sometimes bumbling, always heavily armed. It was a world where a man would propose assassinating politicians only to spark a debate about logistics. Federal prosecutors have convicted more than 1,000 people for their role in January 6th. Key militia captains were sent to prison for a decade or more, but that did not quash the allure that militias hold for a broad swath of Americans. Why would it? After all, Donald Trump initially criticized them, but then turned around and said that they were political prisoners for doing the right thing. Obviously, if the most impactful figure who just won his reelection says that these guys are political prisoners, of course they're going to get away with it. Here, I'll give you one example, okay? We joke about January 6th is funny. A cop died of a stroke the day after, okay? And the suspicion is that the wounds that he got during January 6th from a guy who was beating his ass is responsible for the stroke. That guy's in prison for 6 years, okay? And Donald Trump is most likely going to pardon him. Now, there is no world in which even if a person punches a cop repeatedly or hits a cop with a blunt object repeatedly, they die to a stroke the day after, there is no world in which they only get 6 years. Even if you used a blunt object to beat a cop and nothing happened to the cop, there is still no world in which you only get 6 years. Okay, that's like assault of a peace officer with a deadly weapon. Are you kidding me? There's just no world there. That is not a real circumstance. The only way this happens is if you're doing this while you are participating in an insurrection for the president. Okay, for the current president who just won his reelection. My point is, even if nothing happened to the cop, let alone like the cop died or whatever, even if you just, do you think there is a world where the average American can just use an object to bludgeon a police officer, okay, and then get out in 2 years? There are instances where it's valid and warranted where you are engaging in self-defense, okay, against a police officer who is out of line and abusing their position. Those people do not get this level of leniency from, those people never experience this level of leniency. I'm simply stating that it is crazy. It is crazy that this level of leniency only exists for Republicans, right-wingers that participated in an insurrection. Now, President-elect Donald Trump has promised to pardon January 6 rioters when he returns to the White House. Experts warn that such a move could trigger a renaissance from militant extremists, sending them an unprecedented message of protection and support and making it all more urgent to understand them. Unless otherwise noted, none of the militia members mentioned in the story responded to requests for comment. Williams is part of a larger Cold War, radical versus radical, that stayed mostly in the shadows. A left-wing activist told me he personally knows about 30 people who've gone undercover in militias or white supremacist groups. They did not coordinate with law enforcement, instead taking the surveillance of one of the most intractable features of American politics into their own hands. I think part of the reason why people do this also is because they just don't trust the federal law enforcement officers. Like this person very clearly does not trust the feds, okay? Which is understandable because he's like, I went into the militia movement and I found out that there are, like federal attorneys that are a part of it, people who collaborate with the feds, people who are a part of the criminal justice system, prominent members who are also a part of the militia movement. Skeptical of authorities, militias have sought to reshape the country through armed action. Williams sought to do do it through betrayal and lies, which sat with him uneasily. I could have been successful at this if I wasn't one of them in some respects. He once told me, I couldn't have done it so long unless they recognized something in me. If there's one moment that set Williams on his path into the militia underground, it came roughly a decade before January 6th, when he was sent to a medium security prison. He was early in his 20s, drawn to danger and filled with an inner turbulence. I guess he has the background. My mom was one of the founders of the Utah Citizens Armed Militia, which was organized to keep the peace at BLM protests. These militias are strange because they back the police, but they also don't think that the police are bad enough at their jobs that they have to step in. Yeah, they also will, obviously, like with January 6th, fight back against the police as well. And we'll be shocked every step of the way that the police are not collaborating with them, partially because, like, in their hometowns, the police are definitely collaborating with them. And additionally shocked when, federal law enforcement or the criminal justice system ends up turning on them for doing direct, clear-cut violations of the law. I highly urge you guys to read the ProPublica article. I think that it is a thought-provoking piece that is alarming and perhaps shows what is yet to come, especially considering that these groups are getting emboldened by the Trump regime and will probably be more active in their participation as the disorganized brown shirts that will push for Trump's agenda.